Hey guys, today in this video we will be exploring Core 2 Critical Question 1, How does training affect performance? Dot point 3 of the syllabus. As you can see, the syllabus dot point is the principle of training. If you don't have your syllabus with you, on the board you can see the learnabouts that we will explore in this video. So we've got progressive overload, specificity, reversibility, variety, training thresholds, warm up, and cool down. And if you look across, students learn to analyse how the principles of training can be applied to both aerobic and resistance training. So specifically, we were looking at aerobic and resistance training, which you did do previously in dot point 2 of the syllabus. So we're looking at an analysis style question that may be asked of you in regards to the principles of training. We'll first look at progressive overload. In order for improvements to occur in training, there needs to be some type of progressive overload to the athlete's body. This is applied in both the strength and aerobic training methods. As the training goes along, the body will change. When the changes occur, the training has to be increased to ensure that the body is pushed past what it can currently handle in order for more gains to take place. So, for example, in an aerobic training sense, if the athlete is running for 20 minutes and they're doing this 3 times a week, after a few weeks the body will find this too easy because it has adapted. It has changed the ability of the heart and the lungs to move oxygen into those working muscles, which can then allow the muscles to continue to work for that 20 minutes. So for progressive overload and adaptation to continue, the athlete or the coach has to make a change to the training. Now, progressive overload could be in terms of the distance that they run. So maybe it takes them 20 minutes to run 4Ks, so they might run 5Ks. That's progressive overload. Maybe they'll stay with 4Ks but have to run it in 18 minutes, so they have to run it faster. Those are things that will stress the body and cause adaptations to occur. And I'll put on the board quickly a table which demonstrates this progressive overload technique. So as you can see, the load, is here, and the body becomes used to this, Therefore, it has adapted or causes an adaptation. If we want to continue improving, which all athletes do, we need to increase the load. Then after a certain period of time, an adaptation will occur and the body will get used to it. If we want changes to occur again, we need to increase the load or progressively overload the body. In terms of a strength training program, this may be in the weight that you lift. So you might go up in weight. You might increase the reps, how many times you lift the weight, how many sets you do of that complete exercise. You might reduce the rest time that you have. So all these things will progressively overload the body and cause it to want to make a change because the body enjoys adaptation and wants to be as effective and efficient as possible. However, we need to be careful that if the load is too high, it means there could be an onset of fatigue or injuries because the body can't adapt to such a great amount of change. And you might even find that the athlete just can't actually complete the training because it is too high or too hard. It's just like someone putting too much weight on and then trying to lift it. They won't be able to do it. So progressive overload needs to be consistent and it can't be too dramatic. On the other hand, so this is our overload if we do too much, If we underload it, then the body won't make any changes because there's nothing to change. It's not hard enough for the body to say, oh, I need to get stronger or I need to increase my efficiency of the heart and lungs to ensure that the athlete can continue or complete this activity. So you need to ensure that the overload is effective. Usually endurance adaptations take longer. So therefore, you need to be training for longer for these to occur. So the next dash point that we're going to look at is our specificity dot point, and I'll just go back to our syllabus. So specificity, when we're talking about specificity, we're talking about something that is specific, okay, or similar to the activity. So for training, we need to ensure that we're specifically training the correct energy systems, the correct movements for the movement patterns of the sport, and obviously the muscles. There's no point for a marathon runner to do a lot of swimming because it's not the type of activity that you'll be doing in your sport. So it's specific for that sport, and it needs to reflect the goals and the needs of the athlete. So the greatest gains are made when the athletes can be seen in athletes that train movements, energy systems, and muscle groups that are required for their sport and are seen in the movements in the games. And I gave you the example of a marathon runner. Same with a cyclist. The cyclist is not going to do a large amount of swimming because it's not the activity that they require changes to occur or improvements in. For instance, in aerobic training, it is not beneficial for athletes to practice sprinting, okay, because it's not training the right energy system, say if they're a marathon runner. So they're not going to use the ATP-PC system for a majority of that event. So they have to be doing running, okay, long distance running. Same with strength training or resistance training. If an athlete wishes to improve their muscle gains or muscle mass, okay, it's not going to be beneficial for them to lift a really light weight like 2 kilos. They need to lift a heavy weight for a small amount of times, not a lightweight lots and lots of times, because that's not going to increase their muscle mass. Okay, it will make them stronger, but not in terms of the strong gains they want. Okay, reversibility. You might have heard the sentence of use it or lose it. So as an athlete, okay, if you don't actually train, okay, you're going to lose the gains that you have. So once training ceases, okay, those physiological adaptations that have occurred will start to be reversed, hence reversibility. This can be applied to both the aerobic and the strength or resistance training. So unfortunately, endurance training does take longer to lose. I guess that's a good thing for you if you're a runner, as opposed to someone who's resistance training, that takes less time. They generally say, half the amount of time it takes. So if it takes 8 weeks to train, it might take 2 or 3 weeks to lose those gains. So it's imperative that the athlete continually trains. The next one that we'll be looking at, that's pretty straightforward, is variety, ensuring that the athlete has variety in their training. This ensures that the athlete doesn't become bored, okay, ensures that the athlete doesn't get injured or doesn't risk or decreases the risk of overuse and injuries by doing the same activity. If you're continually running on the same surface, you may risk things like shin splints. So we can change things like the activities, making sure we have a wide range of activities that's varied, hence the name variety. You might also change the settings in which you do activity. Changing it up and keeps the interest going. The types of drills and the training types that you actually use are also imperative too. So you might do a circuit, okay, for a bit of strength and aerobic training, okay, rather than just doing some runs and then doing some push-ups and things on a separate day. You might incorporate it into a circuit, and then obviously incorporating that resistance training too. So variety is important for the athlete. The next one that we're going to look at is training thresholds. And training thresholds, the way to an athlete needs to firstly understand their maximum heart rate, and we all learned that earlier this year. 220 minus your age gives you your maximum heart rate. And for training adaptations or improvements to occur, an athlete needs to train in the appropriate threshold for their sport. So, for example, an athlete who predominantly focuses on aerobic style activities would need to work in the aerobic training zone, and an athlete who is more anaerobic based will have to work in the anaerobic training zone. But I'll show you a picture up on the board which demonstrates these zones. So once we've worked out our maximum heart rate, we can work out now where we need to train. So if you have a look up on the board, this here is our aerobic threshold, and that's approximately 65 to 70% of our max heart rate for an athlete. So an athlete knows that to get some type of aerobic gains, basic limit, beginning of those gains, they need to be working at least the aerobic threshold. Okay. Another threshold point we have is the anaerobic threshold, which is about 85% of our maximum heart rate. And hence the name anaerobic means no oxygen, and it would be of a very high intensity. Now for an athlete to improve their training or to get gains, they need to be working in the aerobic training threshold, which is this yellow line that you see. So this is the aerobic training zone. Apologies, I think I said wrong earlier. This is the aerobic threshold, about 70% of your max heart rate. This is the aerobic training zone, and this is the anaerobic training threshold, which is about 85% of our max heart rate. And this grey area is the anaerobic training zone. And as you can see, it's very high in terms of the heart rate that's being used. There's also maximum VO2, which we learned earlier in prelim course, the amount of oxygen that can be taken into the muscles and used per minute. Again, a large quantity of oxygen is required if you are working in this zone. Now, for an athlete, regardless of whether if you're an aerobic if you are working at the aerobic training activities, you would still want to be working high in this aerobic training zone because there's going to be a greater adaptation than working along down here. Okay, so each athlete needs to ensure that they're working in the appropriate zone. If you're doing sprints and those type of things, you may work in that zone, the anaerobic training thresholds, the anaerobic training zone, and moving across the anaerobic threshold to ensure that you are working the appropriate energy systems, the ATP, PC system, and lactic acid system. As you could be aware, this would be very intense, working in this zone, so making sure adequate rest is imperative. So just to recap, for adaptations to occur, you need to be working in the aerobic training zone, which is between the aerobic threshold and the anaerobic threshold. And athletes can move up their anaerobic threshold by working in that training zone, the anaerobic training zone, and pushing their body's ability to adapt and deal with lactic acid. And therefore you can push up that zone, and it means that you're able to continue to perform and hopefully work for longer without too much fatigue in regards to the lactic acid buildup that can occur. All right, our last dash point that we'll be looking at is warm-up and cool-down. And most of us are aware of these because we have done some sport. So warm-up's obviously imperative to ensure that an athlete is prepared for the activity. Generally, it lasts for 15 minutes and would include dynamic stretching, which is our stretching that involves movements of the sport, and these would be effective. So a nice warm-up would include aerobic style activities, dynamic stretching, and it's there to prepare the mind, so mentally and physically prepare the athlete for activity and ensure it can reduce the risk of injuries occurring to the athlete. Of course, warm-ups are imperative regardless of what activities, so aerobic training and resistance training, you need to ensure that you warm up. Cool downs, similar process. It helps the recovery process, allows the body to go back to its pre-exercise state, brings the heart rate back down, brings breathing rate back down, can help to reduce blood lactate to be broken down and help to reduce muscle soreness. And a stretch, low intensity activity and stretching is also imperative for the cool down. So we've completed all our dot points of the syllabus. Okay, so just to recap, we've looked at progressive overload, specificity, reversibility, variety, training thresholds, warm-ups and cool downs. And in class, we're going to go through how we can actually analyse these principles and apply them to aerobic and strength training.